Welcome to Exploring the Role of AI in Education and the Workplace.
We're two classroom teachers on a mission to make artificial intelligence less intimidating and more inspiring for educators everywhere.
Whether you're just curious about what AI can do or already experimenting with it in your classroom, this podcast is your space to explore, to learn, and to grow.
Each episode features a two-part format. First, we sit down with industry experts to unpack a key aspect of AI, from infrastructure and ethics to creativity and integration.
Then we bring it back to the classroom with a boots on the ground segment, real conversations with educators who are actively using AI with students.
We'll bring you practical insights, honest dialogue, and real-world examples to help you think critically and creatively about the role of AI in teaching and learning.
I'm Georgia Terlahi, a former K-5 instructional coach and an educator who's passionate about tech integration and sparking curiosity in students.
And I'm Jessica Pack, a middle school teacher, education author, and former California Teacher of the Year. My passion is creating compelling learning experiences.
So let's dive in and discover how AI can empower educators and transform classrooms, one episode at a time.
Well, today we are so glad to have some incredible guests here to talk about the policy implications of AI. We are joined by Erin Moat and Dr. Leanne DeLizer. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. To begin, could you please briefly introduce yourself and explain the context in which you work? Could we start with you, Erin?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's so great to be here and lovely to be with a fellow middle school teacher. I love the middle schoolers. People think we're weird, but they're the best age. So I am Erin Moat. I lead the organization Innovate EDU, which leads the EdSafe AI Alliance. The EdSafe AI Alliance was founded way back in 2020, before the breakout of ChatGPT and generative AI, and is focused on the safe, accountable, fair, transparent, and efficacious use of AI in education. And through that work, we work on global policy, standards alignment. We work at the district and state level. We lead 10 state policy labs, 29 district policy labs. And then we focus on really how do we inform the policymaking process at the federal, state, and local level so that safety, accountability, fairness, and transparency are really at the heart of AI's use in education.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. Dr. DeLizer, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Hi, Jessica. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this chat. My name is Leanne DeLizer, and I am the director for the Center for the Future of Education and Technology at SRI Education. Although most people know me from my previous role, prior to joining SRI, I co-founded and ran Computer Science for All for the last 10 years. And in that role, we, much like Erin, worked with schools and districts across the United States, helping them think about how to infuse and integrate computer science education and computational thinking, really setting kids and teachers up for this explosion of AI in the classroom and in schools. And now at SRI, I lead a team of researchers who are thinking carefully about AI and AI policy, working to create AI literacy and how to assess a classroom with AI, as well as working collaboratively at SRI with our AI Center to build new technologies and tools that'll help create the classrooms of tomorrow and really prepare students for the next generation of jobs.
Well, thank you. I feel like we have the dream team here to talk about AI policy. So thank you so much for being here. So my first question, Erin, I'll start with you, is how are current AI policies shaping the education and workforce sectors today?
Well, I think the thing we have to start with is actually there's a pretty fair amount of existing regulatory undergirding that shapes AI policy. And those are probably acronyms and laws that your listeners know, like FERPA and COPPA, or maybe a district's existing acceptable use policy or academic integrity or academic honesty policy. And so one of the things I think that's really important to name is that when I think about the policy stack, if you will, in AI, there is both existing policy that is influencing the practice, and then there are lots of new emerging policy constraints and opportunities that are influencing how AI is used in classrooms. Frankly, at the federal level, we've had very limited AI policy that is impacting education. I will name, however, that last year we had a pretty huge win in protecting kids with AI policy with the signage of the Take It Down Act, which helps prevent non-consensual intimate images from being distributed and sets up a framework for rights for impacted individuals for having that non-consensual intimate material taken down. So that's a great win, and one that really came in the policy context as a response to regulating harm. And I think that's really what you're starting to see at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level, a desire to engage in policy that's focused on regulating harms and regulating foreseeable harms. That's different than guidance, which I think is really, really important. There are more than 30 states who have put out guidance documents about AI use in education, and hundreds of districts that have done so. But there's a real distinction with the difference there between policy and guidance.
Erin, I think what you said is so important because we are trying to encourage creativity, right? And get students and teachers to engage with all of the tools that are possible for them, not only for the classroom experience they want to have today, right? But for their learning trajectory as these tools become even more important in our workforce, our daily lives, all of it. I remember when the internet first dropped into schools. I was a teacher in a high school, and you can imagine what that did. And we were having kids doing web quests, which were the very first, like, try and build a portfolio. Jessica's nodding. She remembers those. And I remember students doing state projects where they were searching about states. And I was teaching in Florida, and there was a website like mymississippi.com and myvirginia.com, and all of those were tourist sites for those states. Unfortunately, there was a state where that same pattern, mystate.com, was actually an adult site. And so at that time, it really set up the notion of, like, we need these filters on students, not because they might necessarily be going to seek out something wrong, but the potential for harm was greater than teachers could monitor in real time, right? And even now, when we're no longer seeing like just screens around a classroom, but Chromebooks with headphones, it's really hard to monitor that as the adult in the room. And so setting up policies that don't only set up regulations around how the people use the technology, but Erin, the work you're doing to help set up regulations around the technology, how it gets served to students, is such an important consideration so that it can be this balance of what schools and teachers and the people need, combined with the way and the shape that that technology arrives on their doorstep.
One of the recurring themes that we've heard from educators and other industry level guests on the podcast has to do with the concept of equitable access. We're wondering how policymakers can help ensure that AI tools are promoting a more equitable learning experience rather than exacerbating some of those inequalities that are currently part of the picture. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. DeLizer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've been talking about the digital divide now for 30 years. And more tools will not close the divide. It will only put more things on the other side of it. And what we're going to see is that the difference between the schools and the districts that have and the ones that are under-resourced is going to be your ability to get specialized pedagogical tools that are customizable for teachers that have done some of the work prior to that tool arriving in front of students. The difference between some tools like Magic School or some of the other ones that are out there is that they've done some of the work. They've set up the tool to be more specific to schools and education than if you just open a Google Gemini or a ChatGPT window, right? And I often liken it to, it's either you're pulling someone off of the street randomly and asking them a question, and they're giving you the best answer they can, versus getting a teacher who's been in a classroom for 15 years with a master's degree who's giving you a different answer, right? And so we'll see a real difference, not just in the access to AI and AI tools, but the type of tools that are free and available everywhere versus the tools that schools have the resources to pay for. And I think that balance is going to be something really hard to navigate, especially as budgets continue to tighten.
Yeah, I couldn't be more supportive of purpose-built education tools, because I think they think, Jessica, about the teacher experience you have in your classroom every single day and how that intersects with pedagogy. I will also say that I think there's a really promising policy development that's come about in the last month, which is the Department of Labor has released an AI literacy framework. And when you look at that very sort of simple framework, one of the things that you see there, which I think is really important for us to call out, is broadband access and connectivity.
Yeah.
Not all students are connected to the internet. I know we think that we've solved that problem here in the United States. We haven't. We haven't solved that problem. And particularly in our rural and low income communities, we see that, for example, students might only have access at home using a mobile phone. We do not have ubiquitous broadband access. So as we talk about tools and as we talk about purpose-built education tools, I also want us to be thinking about what's the underlying infrastructure that we've built to ensure that every community has access. And that includes continuing to needing to focus on that broadband connectivity, making sure that students have access to devices so that when you are thinking about the types of skills that are going to be important in the workforce, that are going to be at a premium when it comes to jobs, AI augmented skills are one of those things. If a young person hasn't had the chance to practice, hasn't had the chance to interact, hasn't had a chance to use those tools, they're going to be left out of the labor force. And that divide will only grow. And so I want us to be thinking not just about just purpose-built tools and pedagogy and practice for our teachers and our educators, but also, are our communities connected?
I think that's a hugely important point. I know Jessica and I, where I have taught and where she teaches, there's a lot of low income students, and that's always an issue. And I think we need to just keep kind of yelling that at the rooftops, because I think people get complacent that, oh, everyone's connected. It's everywhere now, not realizing that, there
Right.
are families and kids that, are having to either go to the library or sit outside Starbucks or something just to maybe even get work done.
That's right.
And kind of, we're talking about AI in education and the workplace, and this may be like a two-part question, but what ethical safeguards should be in place to prevent bias in AI-driven learning platforms or in hiring algorithms?
Yeah, I'm going to jump right in. And Erin mentioned the Department of Labor's AI framework. And I think one of the content areas for AI literacy that is so important is to evaluate AI outputs. We're going to have to be talking about a new set of skills. Jessica, you teach middle school. I have a 7th grader in my household, and I can tell you that her ability to critique, right? She's still just working on being able to read complex material and understand it where she can answer questions. So then her ability to take and critique that and not just take it for what it is going to be a critical skill that we all have to build. I think the tools are going to keep growing, and the better AI gets, the more we'll be likely like, yeah, that sounds right. We'll take it. Right. So I think, Georgia, it's not necessarily about us being able to make sure that the tools don't have that bias built in, because they will. Let's be clear. They are built on things that humans write and say and share and contribute to this world of data and information. But what's going to be on us and the things that we can do to prevent that bias from overtaking society is really think about, how do we interrogate what AI puts out? How do we build the skills for close and careful reading? Asking kids to say, like, what do you wonder after you read this?
Yeah.
Right. And that kind of work, combined with the delivery principles for building these complementary human skills, are going to be so important, not just for our kids, but to your point, for making sure that the tools we're bringing into schools don't set us up to once again be unsuccessful in reaching every child.
Yeah, I really appreciate Leanne's point that bias is baked into all these tools. So if a ed tech vendor or a tech vendor comes to you and says, don't worry, there's no bias in my tool, you can just delete the email, shut the door. Like, that is not possible because of the data sets that these tools are built on, the training materials they're built on, and frankly, like some really unique things that I won't bore us with, but in education constrain our ability to have had public infrastructure that's akin to healthcare or others that allow you to build more representative data sets. The thing I want to pull towards in the policy space is actually a lot of movement at the state level on something called consequential decision making, that I want all of your listeners to really be aware of this growing set of policy work that's happening. And maybe in states that people don't think are the first ones to sort of walk forward on things like AI and civil rights, like Florida and others. And even though the bill didn't make it over the finish line on Friday in Florida, it's a really important thing to be aware of state movement on ensuring that algorithms aren't making consequential decisions that could alter the trajectory of someone's life. So let me give you a couple examples of that. An algorithm not being able to decide if you get a mortgage or not. An algorithm not being able to decide if you get into college or not. An algorithm not being able to decide if you get a home loan for improvements or whether or not you get a student loan. And so this idea that we know these tools are biased. We know that they have selection bias that isn't just about racial identifiers. It can be about zip code. It can be about dialect. AI tools discriminate against young people when they use the word y'all. And I say the word y'all all the time, y'all. And so it knocks you down in terms of proficiency and grade level and dialectical differences that are often contextual or regionalized. And so just making sure that we have a human in the loop. And that's where policy is going, is saying, as a principle, on these consequential decisions, because we know these tools are biased, we're gonna regulate to make sure that there's a human in the loop. And I think that's a really important piece of the policy means and methods that are starting to really be recognized at the state, both in terms of thinking about how do we use our policy lever to ensure that we get the outcomes that prioritize human judgment alongside these tools. And frankly, I think we're going to need that. Unfortunately, I think there's such a push sometimes towards operational efficiency and productivity. Look what's happening in resume screening now and the widespread use of AI and that we're going to need, again, where there is foreseeable harm, some guidelines and guardrails around things like consequential decision making.
And I think for teachers in the classroom, one of the most important things you can do is tell your stories. If you encounter, like my story of the mystate.com versus the other ones, right? We need to hear those stories. If you are connected at all to Innovate EDU and the work that Erin does, I'm sure there's a way that you can send her these narrative stories. But even more close to home, there's something called the STEM ecosystems there's 126 STEM ecosystems around the country. They're coalitions of teachers, and they work really closely with state legislators to think about state policy as well. Reach out to your local STEM ecosystem and say, I have a story to tell, because you may not know the right policy answer. But if we don't know the stories that are the outliers of how the policy's not working, the experts like Erin and others can't make policy that wraps their arms around those challenges, right? So as an educator, tell your stories. If you get a wonky thing, it's like, this is kind of on the edges of what works or not works. Reach out and tell somebody that story. It doesn't have to be a newspaper article. Just tell someone who is really trying to think about policy. And that way they can use that story to help guide the way we set those guardrails and boundaries that Erin was talking about. And share with us, the researchers too. We want to know, so that we can say, like, here are the ways and the shape of this, so that we can also help inform how people are thinking about AI and how to use it.
This is such a great conversation. In my mind, it kind of dovetails with the concept of using AI powered tools to grade and not necessarily putting your own professional judgment at the center of the marks that we're giving students. Data is often described as the new oil powering AI. How should institutions balance the need for data to train AI systems with strong protections around student and even worker privacy? What should that look like? Erin, could we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts here. So, you know, I think the idea that we have to be safeguarding and stewarding student, employee, and workforce data is something actually teachers have been doing for a really, really long time. And so this is not something new. But I think the tools are getting more and more sophisticated in terms of the ways that they are maybe intersecting into entry points, into a school system. So you might not know that an AI tool is scraping your email to help you generate those parent emails if you might be using a tool that might help you do that. And so the risk aperture is much bigger. At EdSafe AI, we've released a number of resources for superintendents, for CIOs, for CTOs, for teachers in classrooms about what questions they need to be asking about how the data is being used, not just in model training or in tools, but really important things like, is the data being offshored or stored somewhere outside of the US? And then I'll just introduce something that I hope doesn't turn anyone into a blind panic, but I think is really, really important for folks to understand. So I'm a technologist, and I think it's really important to understand why we see so many AI companies going after education institutions, higher ed, K-12, and trying to get learning data. So right now, we all are thinking about, how do we protect personally identifiable information? First name, last name, so on and so forth. We absolutely need to be thinking about that 100%. But the most valuable data for the foundational models, at least, is something called learning process data. This is the data about, Jessica, how you correct students when they make a mistake in your classroom. What is the misunderstanding? How you issue the correction? What does that look like? And why is that so valuable? Because right now, foundational models and many AI tools are trying to move towards training of the models to think like a human, to learn like a human, to correct like a human. That's something called artificial general intelligence and super intelligence. And so the most valuable data for those tools right now is learning process data. And who has learning process data in abundance? Schools, institutions of higher education, teachers, so on and so forth. And so when I think about data is the new oil or data is the new gold, it also makes me sort of call out to teachers, to institutions, and say, listen, in this gold rush, don't give the ground lease on the family farm away to the miners for free by giving away your learning process data. And so we, I think, have to become more sophisticated as consumers of this technology around how we're using it, what these tools are doing, where they're harvesting the data, and what they might be using that data for. So not to like become a doomer here, but I think in education circles, we have to really understand that we are highly targeted for our learning process data, because it is the most valuable thing for AI tool development right now, is that idea of, how do we understand how humans learn, how they correct, how they pivot, so on and so forth. That's something AI deeply, deeply needs in order to make that next giant leap of evolution.
Erin, I think that that's such an important point. And earlier in the conversation, we talked a little bit about the difference between the free tools and the tools that people who are able to pay for subscriptions or education specific tools. And I think one of the things that goes unsaid but really needs to be talked about is those free tools are the ones that are gathering as much data as they possibly can. And so we're also going to be looking at a world where the digital divide isn't only about the tools you have or the skills you build, but it's also who gets basically their data robbed from them. Because if a teacher assigns a project to kids, then can the child says, no, I don't want to give my data to that model? No, it's an assignment, right? It's something they have to turn in. Can parents say, no, I don't want my student to be having this conversation with this chatbot because it's a free thing and it's scraping all of that conversation for their data, right? So thinking about how we choose the tools that we use, how teachers understand whether or not students and parents are giving permission for that data to be collected, not by the school, not by the teacher, but by some third-party company that's not even based in this state or even this country, right? I think having that build that awareness is a really important part. And one of the things policy can do is regulate that transparency.
That's right.
How do we make sure that students understand what they're giving away by interacting with these tools and that they are asked for their consent and their assent? And then how are we making transparent to teachers and parents and caregivers the kinds of things that will be taken through the use of those tools and taken outside of the district and outside of their control?
Yeah. And if you're a teacher who's using a free model, just stop. Like you just let me tell you full stop doing that. Right now, like talk to your CIO and CTO about getting an enterprise level license. Go talk to your district administrator. You, I think, might not know that the cost of free is exceptionally high, and privacy is now a luxury good. And so we have to be very focused on how we help people understand that free does not mean free. Free means very, very high cost.
So, one of the things that is sort of nagging my mind listening to both of you speak is are our current privacy measures really all that adequate to handle the AI boom? Is there more legislation that's needed? Or, this is just mind blowing to sit here and have this conversation. So, what is the next step? Where do we need to go?
Well, one good piece of news is in April, actually, some of our federal rulemaking around AI and student privacy is being updated with COPPA. So late April 22nd, new rules go into effect for tools for young people under the age of 13 that use AI. And so that's one good piece of news is, Jessica, policymakers recognized the answer to your question was no and started that work years ago to really update COPPA. And so in April, those rules will go into effect. And I think that will be a good moment for us to take stock within the existing regulatory auspices of COPPA and say, do we need more? With FERPA, the answer is we need to do more to update a law that was last updated, originally conceived in 1978, last updated with some new guidance in the 2013, last significant update 2013. We need to update guidance. We need to think through how we adapt, at least at the federal infrastructure, those laws that are, again, existing regulatory undergirding. How do we update that to bring it into effect? And then at the federal level, there's a pretty big push on Capitol Hill right now with a suite of bills. In the Senate, we've seen actually just last week, 2 weeks ago, unanimous consent passage never happens. They didn't even need to take a vote on it. All 100 senators passed COPPA 2.0, an update to that bill. COSA also came out of the Senate with over 90 votes. That doesn't happen in this Congress. It's now really in the hands of the House and what's going to happen there. Will we see consequential kids' privacy legislation over the finish line at the federal level this year? I have a crystal ball on my desk. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. And so we will see. I think the closer we get to midterms, the harder that is. But I think there is a pretty substantial recognition that we need to do something at the federal level in terms of advancing more regulatory work. At the state level, there's already states that are leading here, from New York to California to Colorado. I mentioned Florida's push. But there have been a substantial number of states here who have raised their hands and said, this is not enough. And in the absence of federal movement, we're going to continue to push ahead. And so California last year passed some of the most consequential updates to their child privacy infrastructure. Colorado 2 years ago designated education as a high-risk use case in order to be able to do some policy making there. So Jessica, the answer to your question is we need more rules of the road. We need more regulations. We need to update the existing regulatory undergirding, and then we need to likely come forward with a set of policy that, again, takes what we can imagine as foreseeable harm and puts pretty strict guardrails around that. So none of us want non-consensual intimate images of kids. I think we can all agree on that, right? So that was great. We put guardrails there. There's a couple other things I think we have broad scale agreement on, like we shouldn't be selling kids' data. We should be protecting kids' identities. We should be thinking about the impact of AI chatbots and companions in terms of the foreseeable harms that we have seen there. That's a place I think we're seeing bipartisan agreement on regulation, and I'm hopeful. But the states are really leading here, and I'm excited to see that leadership.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to that notion of interrogating AI, right? We all have to be critical and careful consumers, whether it's looking at the output of the AI, but also considering the terms of service. Are teachers using something that's not actually meant to be used in schools, right? So if we're using a Chrome browser and we turn on the Gemini plugin for that browser, right? Are we then bypassing the COPA rules because now I have a open access chatbot, which is not explicitly designed for use in schools and may not recognize that it's being used on a child's laptop in a classroom, and so may not contain the same privacy protections as something that is necessarily designed for that academic environment, right? So we have to ask that question. We also have to ask the question of Erin, we keep talking about data and not selling students data and not giving away our data. But very quickly, it's not going to be about the data. We're going to be talking about the models. And so that if we have a company that is adhering to COPA and keeps all of the data for a school within its walls, right? The data never leaves. It is using that data to train a model, and there's nothing preventing them from selling that model outside of those walls, right? And we don't yet know the consequences of how those models will take and use that data and potentially even come back around to students. Some of the early picture generating AI, people are like, oh, that's my picture, because it was in an open access data set that was used to train the AI, and you could see how a piece of what they had created was taken and used, right? So as we get into more complex data, not just imagery, we may be experiencing similar things where pieces of that data become part of that model that then gets sold or shared or communicated in a way that breaks the general intent of protection that we're trying to set up. So I think soon we have to shift our conversations from talking about data to talking about data and models when we talk about what we need to protect and what we're actually signing off on sharing when we use a product.
Policymakers often struggle to keep pace with technological innovation. What strategies can help ensure that regulations encourage responsible experimentation rather than stifle progress?
I'll start there. I mean, I think we have to start with the principle that safety is not the counterpolarity of innovation. And we have to just like say that out loud and not think that we have to make a false choice here between safety and innovation. And so, I think that policy is a very, very blunt instrument. And so that's why at EdSafe, it's not like we just do policy. We do a lot on policy, but we do a lot of other work that's about building an ecosystem approach. And I'll talk, so first, I think all the work that we are doing focused on AI literacy. So along with 3 other organizations, we lead National AI Literacy Day, which is on March 27th in 2026. And there we're really focusing on building the discernment that Leanne was talking about. How do we help people understand what this technology is, discern about this technology, the inputs, the outputs, and really build that muscle for critique, but also that muscle for understanding. Because I think one of the things that's really easy to do here is when you listen to people like me or Leanne, you might feel a little bit of fear. And it might make you want to say, oh, I'm never touching those tools again. And that's not our intention. What we really want to be doing is building that knowledge, not fear. And so AI literacy alongside those policy levers is really, really essential. And as a mom of a 10-year-old who uses AI side by side with me, it's one of those things that we need to be thinking about how we're building those skills, not just for my kids and kids around the country, but how are we building those skills for educators? How are we building those skills for folks all throughout the workforce? And so there's a lot of mechanisms that we can think about in order to promote innovation, things like sandbox, things like building public infrastructure and using and building data sets so that the training models that we were talking about before aren't biased. Using and building a set of testing infrastructure like benchmarks around safety and privacy and the learning sciences, which is something EdSafe will release in September, a benchmark around the learning sciences that helps folks understand how models and tools stack up against safety, against privacy, and against, does it actually further learning outcomes? Or are we programming something for sycophancy rather than Socratic learning? So those are some of the pieces of the infrastructure, the literacy, and the policy that I think, Georgia, have to go hand in hand in order for us to really maintain that truth that safety isn't the counterpolarity of innovation.
Erin, I love that you called out sandboxes. I think they're so important. And I think the more that we can help support getting tools in classrooms that teachers and students can feel safe using because it has like the guardrails around the sandbox, the better we'll be. I think back to science class where we had to build a bridge out of pieces of spaghetti, right? In that activity, you put the pieces of spaghetti together and the goal is to try and hold something up. And half of the classroom, it's going to fall into little pieces that you're going to sweep up later and clean up the mess, right? But we're doing it in a safe environment where you're not driving real cars over that spaghetti bridge. You're not asking students to stand on it where they're going to fall and break their leg, right? But we're giving them a safe place to try, watch it fail, and learn from that failure. And we're going to have to continue to embrace failure as a key part of this process of how to bring AI into schools. How do kids learn how to use it? But that failure has to not be catastrophic. And so the best way we can do to set up that creative innovation in a way that won't have catastrophic outcomes, I think that's the best thing we can do to balance that notion of safety. And then, as I said before, tell your stories. If something failed, tell us and tell the people in your community how it went wrong. Talk to your other teachers, your colleagues, your administrators, so that these stories can filter up. And so we can make the sandboxes better. We can pick the rocks out, right? I think it's really important that teachers try, because the more you try, the more we'll learn. And the more we'll learn, the better we'll get at this.
I think that's a great place to end us. This has been such a great conversation. You've given Jessica and I so much to think about. So appreciate that. Before we go today, could you briefly share where listeners could reach out to you if they'd like to continue this conversation? Erin, where could listeners reach out to you?
Well, I am a prolific poster on LinkedIn. And so you can follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me there, be part of the network. I try to use it as a channel. Sometimes I share funny things about how I leave bananas in my purse. Other times the latest policy updates. So it's a healthy mix. And if you want to learn more about EdSafe AI, go to edsafeai.org. If you want to learn about the work of the policy labs, AIpolicylabs.org, there actually our districts are publishing starter dough is what I like to call it. So their policies that they've developed with us in an open science approach that districts and others can take in order to be able to build that guidance, to be able to have at least a leg up in thinking through what their policy stack needs to look like. And there's even resources and tools in there for teachers who might want to, have a glossary of terms that they work with with their students with, help them understand what a hallucination is and what that means. And to think through those places. And then always AIliteracyday.org has year-round content, lessons, asynchronous professional development, all built around AI literacy. So not just on March 27th, but all year round, there's materials there that you can use in classrooms, in communities, and in conversation to build that knowledge, not fear.
Thank you, Erin. Leanne, where could listeners reach out to you?
I am also a LinkedIn person, so please come and find me on LinkedIn, leave me a message, send me a private chat. I'm happy to connect with you. And I'd encourage you also to connect with SRI Education. So we also have a LinkedIn channel. We have the Homeroom blog, which is really great. And we run a few podcasts as well as a number of other opportunities to hear from researchers and colleagues like Erin, who recently was on a webinar with another colleague of mine, Susan Patrick, for the Learn Network. So there's lots and lots of things that SRI does, but starting with LinkedIn with the SRI Education and finding me there is probably the best way to connect with the broad set of work we do around teaching practice, student assessment, AI literacy, student mental health, and all of those things wrapped into a big package.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you.
Now that we've heard from the experts, it's time to take it to the classroom.
This is our Boots on the Ground segment where we talk with real educators doing the real work with AI right alongside of their students.
Today, we are so excited to have some incredible guests here to talk about the policy implications of AI. We are joined by Matt Winters and Doug Henderson. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and expertise. To begin, could you maybe briefly introduce yourself and the context in which you work? Matt, can we start with you?
Absolutely. Matt Winters. I work at the Utah State Board of Education. My role is AI education specialist for statewide systems, and been doing this role for about 2 years, which makes me a grandpa in the system, which is fantastic.
Thank you so much. And Doug, how about you?
I'm the director of STEAM for Valverde Unified School District, which is in Southern California. And we're about 2.5 years in this AI policy work and figuring out how it's going to roll out across the district. So yeah, I'm also a grandpa when it comes to this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for being here on a Friday afternoon. We appreciate that. So to get started, as AI tools begin appearing in classrooms, how are emerging policies or district guidelines shaping the way educators approach these technologies? Matt, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm kind of at a zoomed out level. I'm working at the state level and then at the national level, working with other states. And what we're seeing is what I like to call the policy sandwich. We have teachers and individual schools kind of picking up the policy and guideline, focal points and really running with them. So teachers will create their own, school or a classroom level policy around artificial intelligence use, maybe even an assignment level policy. And then at the other end, you have superintendents or states really starting to think through what a policy around very specific things. So where we mostly see policy kind of coming to a head, because remember, policy is hard and rigid. It's meant to be that way. And so we see that a lot in like acceptable use policies or AUPs, where you're talking about your technology use in your district or in your school, plagiarism policies, those sorts of things. But then we're also seeing a lot of frameworks which are designed to be kind of historically predictive documents about what may happen or what we'd like to see happen with this technology over time. Some of the best ones are connected to, mission and vision, or to their portrait of a graduate, those sorts of things. And so there's a lot of like kind of this sandwiching happening where there's a lot of guidance and focus from higher level systems, and then also districts and teachers in their own classrooms and building leaders are really starting to build policy as well. But with the technology growing as fast as it is, we're still somewhat behind the times in the United States. Currently, there's 35 or 36 states that have some sort of ratified framework document around AI, and then it's even lower for individual districts and schools. So what we're really talking about are some of our most forward-thinking districts and schools, and in the states, but it's growing rapidly, which it should, because we're really trying to respond to the technology that's out there.
Doug, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. When it comes to the policy, like being able to set high top-down approaches on how we're going to protect students and teachers in this entire process is hugely important. But then after that, it's about making sure teachers have a voice in what we're doing moving forward. So we've run, well, I should say not even just teachers. We've also run parent town halls. We've had student town halls. We've had all these of, hey, what do we as a community feel like proper AI usage looks like? And we took a lot of their feedback, incorporated that into our guidance document. So CSBA for the state, the California State Board Association, has guidance for the board, right? So when I say policy, I always say, like, I don't want to get into board policy because they made some recommendations. Just take that, like, fine. It was fine. It's typically not going to be what you're going to use to implement actual change across your district, but the board handles what they want to do. Then the rest of it is in that guidance document that then is saying, like, well, how are we putting in the hands of students? How are we putting in the hands of teachers? How do we support teachers in this entire process? Because it's new for everybody. And what does that look like? And so being able to get everybody's input into what it looks like, I always say you got to go slow to move fast, because this entire thing has so many layers upon layers upon layers that if you just jump in and be like, boom, we're 100% AI all the time, you're going to get a lot of kickback. There's going to be a lot of, I want to say fear per se, but people just not really knowing exactly what AI is and can we trust it and all of those kinds of things. So you have to kind of set everybody's mind at ease before you can start having some of these honest conversations about how we're going to let AI transform education in the district.
I think that's such an important point about making sure that you're tapping into the preparation for all stakeholders and making sure everyone is onboarded, because sometimes as classroom teachers, we really only think about like ourselves and the students in the learning equation, but the parents are an important voice too. Doug, from your perspective as an educator, what opportunities do you see for AI to enhance teaching and learning? And where do you think maybe clear guardrails are still needed?
So this was a huge one for me, because I think, especially when it comes to English and writing and in that subject area, which I was a biology teacher for 20 years. So I would have loved to have some of the tools that we have right now. But I think there's a paradigm shift coming in assignments and how to teach people how to write. How do we still keep critical thinking in the conversation when we're asking kids to write and build documents and that kind of stuff? So I think there's a way where we can actually change the way kids are educated, but it's going to be a huge process. So whether we're implementing AI and getting people to understand that AI is more than just a writing tool, it's far more. So when we start looking at, like, so we ran just for example, we ran a workshop a couple weeks ago where we had teachers, and the premise was this: if you could build any app right now in your classroom that you could use that would help you to do anything, what would it be? worked them through that. And then we had them build it. Like they literally vibe coded apps that they could use in their classroom to work right now. So we had some early literacy lessons created by elementary teachers that were phonics based, gamified phonics based apps that they could roll out to their students to help them with some of these things. And we had 35 or so different apps that teachers created that this would solve problems in my classroom and would help me. And now I don't have to go to my administration and say, hey, can I get money to purchase this thing? Because now I could just build an app to do the things in my classroom that I want to do, which is different than, am I just using AI to write lesson plans? Or, hey, can you make this appropriate for an EL student or for a SPED student or whatever those things would be? So being able to see like there's so much more in what you can do to your classroom, and it opens up the possibilities if you're willing to start shifting the way you're planning on instructing and the way you're planning on assessing kids, because there's so many capabilities out there.
That sounds like an amazing opportunity to just have this awesome workshop with so many teachers workshopping practical solutions for the things that they need. I wish I had been there.
We'll invite you next time.
Thank you. Matt, do you have anything to add? Where do you see AI as a potential to enhance learning, and where do you think those clear guardrails might still need to be needed?
Yeah, I love what Doug just said. I was in a think tanky thing a couple of months ago, and this wonderful charter school educator brought up this metaphor of learning, where learning for a long time was you hop on a train, you're going cross country, you're going to get to your destination eventually, but you're stopping along the way to learn a bunch of things as you go along. And then you get to your destination, you build this big project and everything's all happy and exciting. And now with AI, he was very down on this. We can jump right to the end product and bullet train straight to the end. And one of the things I think about with teaching and learning is that we have to rephrase what we're thinking about in terms of assessment, just like what Doug said, because sometimes that thing that we used to consider as the end game for a student, that could be the beginning of the whole system. And now they can do all sorts of new things. Doug, you brought up vibe coding apps with teachers. I mean, the same thing could be said for students as well. And there's a lot of things that we could actually do now differently in terms of assessment. And the metaphor the kind of historical trend I always think about is, 25 years ago when I was in high school, I wanted to make videos. I wanted to create things with my teacher, but we didn't have video software. We didn't have cameras. We didn't have anything of that sort. And now today, creating a video is a basic concept in most classrooms because there's technology and the ability to do it. I think AI, we have to look at it a little differently, is how is it going to speed up that assessment route, and what new assessments can we create and make them authentic as well. On the flip side, when you talk about guardrails, there's so much in that conversation, but one of the things we have to consider is that there's so much to AI and so many problems that could manifest with it that we have to have clear, safe guardrails at both the school level, which we strive in every school across the country to have good cybersecurity, to have good filtering, to take care of our kids and make sure that they're, not accessing problematic material. But then those students go home, they're on their home devices, they're on their home computers, never on a school network, or never on a school computer. And so that we have to also give them some consumer protection that way as well. And so that's something that here in the state of Utah we've done, where we have an Office of AI policy that is really digging into that particular side of the AI conversation so that we can protect not just our students, but also all of our adults and everyone else around issues like companion chatbots or mental health issues with AI or deep fake images and things like that. And so when we talk about guardrails, it's not just what happens in the classroom that's important. It's also what's happening kind of globally with this technology that we need to start thinking about and providing guardrails for.
I think that's such an important point. Matt, you were talking about what they're seeing at home. Like, I don't know. For me, that opens my eyes because we're always so worried about what's going on at school. So, I think that, I don't know, it just kind of blew my mind, as you always do. So equity is a major concern when new technologies are introduced. how can schools ensure that AI tools expand learning opportunities for all students rather than widening existing gaps? Doug, what are your thoughts on that?
Um, so kind of the style that we decided to approach this is, if I want to put AI, I know Matt, you mentioned we should have kids vibe coding. Just so you know, I do have the kids vibe coding right now, so they are doing that. But here's my example when it comes to that. I have one teacher at my biggest high school who is teaching vibe coding. So 35 kids are getting access to vibe coding. That's it. So then, okay, so putting it in the hands of students now means, do I have teachers who have the confidence to be able to say, hey, I'm okay with, because with vibe coding, by the way, you don't even need to be an expert. You just have to know how to use plain English, and you tell the thing in plain English what it is you want, and it builds it for you, right? So no coding needed. So then how do I get teachers confident to be not an expert in the room, because now the AI is the expert in the room and they could build things so that now all students have access. Well, and our approach has been, hey, how do we get teachers confident with AI first? So if we focus on administrators and teachers and build their confidence within using AI tools and incorporating AI tools, get them understanding the protections that are involved with AI tools, and that we can put in the hands of students. And once we get them comfortable, they're going to be more likely to put in the hands of students, which is really the only way you're going to ever tackle the equity issue, so that you do no longer have pockets of access in a district or a campus. Now you have systemic access to kids that now have the ability to code and use AI, so that when they go to the workforce, once they graduate, they actually know how to incorporate those appropriately into their jobs moving forward.
I love that idea. I'm just thinking of probably not even in a far future, of doing your own differentiation in class as a student by creating your own apps. I mean, that's kind of exciting to think about. Matt, what do you think about schools ensuring that AI tools are available for everyone and doesn't kind of diminish the equity issue?
Yeah, when we talk about applying AI to classrooms, we first have to consider that there are other things that need to be in place first. If the school has unequitable access to internet, or spotty internet coverage, that's going to cause problems right there. If you don't have programs for devices and upkeep of those devices over time, that's going to cause problems for the building as well. But then on top of that, I love, Doug, that you went directly to teaching. If you don't have teachers that are engaged and enabled to use this technology, and are in the creative mindset to really dig into it, that's going to create some gaps as well. And so all of that is a big parts of this particular puzzle. The big thing is that we don't want to create bigger gaps out of things that were already a gap. If we go ahead and add AI and then it's only for a few students, that's creating a wider gap around the kids that don't have access as well. And so we want to make sure that everything kind of comes back to this platform of, are we solving the issues that help all students to build up over time and get them into a good place? And that's where, the role of consortiums and states can help out as well, with helping to get prices down on different tools, providing teacher training and support, and then also hopefully over time providing legislation that really digs in deeply to providing funds and teacher opportunities for these programs as well. And so it takes time and it takes a holistic effort, but it can be done.
One thing that I am curious to get your input on is about AI grading or AI-driven feedback. Doug, some AI tools now assist with feedback grading. They make learning recommendations. What role should teacher judgment play when AI-generated insights are part of that decision-making process?
I think the first thing to realize is that learning itself is relational, right? So the kids who learned if you remember back to your days in school, the teachers you remember the most are the ones you identified with, and you might have learned the most in those classes. So if you're using AI to avoid having conversations or discussions with kids, this is not going to be beneficial to your kids. A lot of the feedback tools they have right now will give suggested feedback. that the teacher then has to go read and approve and work their way through. I know I've seen English teachers that do the, I don't want to read the first 5 iterations of your paper. I want to read the last couple because, we're going to work our way through this. And so they have automatic feedback on earlier versions. So, but no matter what, the key is that eventually at some point, as the educator in the room, you're going to have conversations. You're going to relate with those kids. You're going to have conversations. You're going to talk about here's where you need to improve, but we don't want to take the teacher out of the loop. They have to be, they're a key part of the loop, and you got to keep them in there. And how does AI allow you to not replace you as a teacher, but give you more time to sit down and talk to that kid about that paper? Hey, I noticed you took this approach to this topic. What about if you think about this approach and come at it at a different angle, something like that. So I definitely, and they have the anti-cheating and that kind of stuff, which those are also in a whole other area where you're like, those can't tell you 100% that it's cheating. So you're still having the old conversation that as a teacher you had to have at some point. Hey, I think you cheated. And the student's like, no, I didn't. And I was like, well, I think you did. Well, no, I didn't. I think you did. You have to go back and forth. It's still that way with AI. There's no 100% accurate. They absolutely cheated. So now it's the point where do you really want to pay for an AI anti-cheat thing, because you're still going to have that same awkward conversation that we've been having with kids for all these years. You copied out the encyclopedia or whatever, in the years past. So making sure that no matter how you use the AI, that me having interactions with my students face to face, it increases that time, not decreases. And the teacher is always the in the loop on the entire process.
Centering the human element has been a theme that we've heard over other episodes as well. So thanks for bringing that back to the center. Matt, what are your thoughts?
I've got to agree with you on that, Doug. One of the things I think about quite heavily is we hear a lot about what AI is going to do to our society and what's going to take it away. And I was just reading an article today about Jack Dorsey. His company, fired 40% of his workforce and blamed it on AI. And people are losing their jobs. They're going to take away our ability to understand information. And it's going, the list kind of goes on and on and on. I always have to kind of remind myself that there are things that AI will never be able to take away from us. And we should lean into those scenarios. Things like the teacher-student relationship, Doug, that you're pointing to. Like, I've had that conversation numerous times where it's like, hey, I think you used, Wikipedia a little too much on this paper. Like, that's a problem. Like, let's talk that through. But that's a teacher-student relationship that's based on human interaction and is of ultimate value in the classroom right there. And so we have to keep that in mind, that there are always going to be things that the AI can't take away from us as humans, and we should lean into those skill sets quite heavily. On top of that, when we think about feedback, grading, learning recommendations, one thing that in your question, it says AI generated insights. We have to be very careful as educators when we talk about AI, especially around people who may not be technically minded, because in this case, when we say AI, what we're talking about is generative AI. But AI is embedded in so many of our systems. One of the teachers I work with here in the state of Utah, I asked her if she had a policy in her classroom, an English teacher, and she said, oh, I have a policy in my classroom, no AI in my classroom. And I was like, so you're willing to ban translation and predictive texting and grammar checks and everything? And she just, the dismay on her face afterwards. We have to be really careful what we are telling our students about AI, so that they maintain their appropriate use and that their decision-making process is also honored as well. And I think that's of equal value for us as teachers to make sure that we're doing recommendations around that.
I want to piggyback on what Matt said right there, if I'm allowed to go out of turn, which was, if that's the teacher who says no AI ever, and you stick your head in the sand and pretend like it doesn't exist, just know that gave all of the power of AI usage to the kids. The kids now control the AI usage in your classroom. So you gave away your power. So teaching them responsible usage, like, hey, on this paper, we're only using it to build the outline, but I need you to write the paper yourself. Or, hey, on this paper, we're going to write the paper using AI, and being able to teach them, hey, there's a responsible usage plan. Use it in different ways so they can see different ways to use it. And then kids start to realize that it's an appropriate tool at an appropriate time, and not just a way to cheat on everything else you do. And I think at that point, then now as a teacher, I've taken control of the AI in my classroom, because now I dictate when and if it's going to be used. I'm sure you have kids that'll push the boundaries on that too. But though you'll have, I feel like you're going to have less pushback if you set the boundaries versus the kids set the boundaries.
I am just so thankful we're having this conversation right now because I am an English teacher. So thank you for all of those great thoughts to take back to my department.
And I think some great ideas for teachers that are listening that are wondering, like, how do I start in my classroom with some, guardrails that still let my students be, to be creative and all of those things without stealing everything from somewhere else. We want to thank you, gentlemen, so much for this conversation today. We've learned some really interesting things, as always. Could you briefly share where listeners could reach you if they'd like to continue this conversation? Doug, can we start with you?
Sure. So Val Verde Unified School District, you can find me on the webpage, or my email is dhenderson@valverde.edu. So, and I'll answer any emails that show up.
Thank you.
I'm also LinkedIn. You can find me on there too.
And Matt, where could listeners find you?
Yeah, Utah State Board of Education. You can find me at matt.winters@schools.utah.gov, or like Doug said, everyone's moving to LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, so come find me there.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of AI in education and the workplace. This podcast series has been brought to you by the Utah STEM Action Center and STEM Connector. If today's conversation sparked ideas, questions, or curiosity, we've got more for you. Head over to our podcast portal for extended learning at aistemcast.com.
You'll find curated resources, classroom-ready tools, and ways to dive deeper into each episode's topic. We're building a community of educators who are ready to explore what's possible with AI, and we would love for you to be part of it.
Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and don't be afraid to dive into something new.